Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. My guest today is Jeff Miller. He's currently the Senior Director of Platform Engineering at Yellow. He's also worked at companies like Fuda, NCSA, and Innova here in Chicago. He's mentored and spoke to many coding boot camps, so I hope you enjoy. All right, well then let's get started. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing very well. Thanks so much for being on today. Jeff Miller is the Senior Director of Platform Engineering at Yellow here in Chicago. He's also been Chicagoland area in a number of different Director of Engineering roles over the years. But could you give a little intro of Yellow and kind of what your role looks like now?
Yeah. So Yellow helps Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, so very large companies, hire the early talent of their business. So the JP Morgan Chases of the world, or Ernst & Young, or very large companies, we help them hire people directly out of college or their first job, which is a little bit different challenge than hiring experienced people for roles. So. And then my role there is on the platform side of the house. So I have a peer that runs our feature teams, and they deliver features every day that go directly to in front of the customer. Whereas my teams do a little bit more of the plumbing, more of the not quite infrastructure, but just like upgrading Ruby, upgrading Rails, creating really foundational pieces for those feature teams to then use for customer-facing features.
Oh, interesting. I feel like that term platform engineering has a lot of different meanings at a lot of different companies, but that makes a lot of sense to kind of separate that out, because I think that's such a common issue that you see in engineering teams, right? Is that you're pulling people off of production to do these things that don't seem as mission critical. But if you're not pulling people off of production to do that, then all of a sudden it builds up and, everything explodes at one point.
Yeah. So it's a variety of tech debt and also enablement features, right?
Yeah.
So how can we make our developers more effective? That might be, CI/CD pipelines. That might be speeding up the test suite. All of those type of annoying little things. But if you don't do them, like you said, they'll build up.
Yeah, interesting. And it's been a couple of years, but if I remember correctly, Yellow is primarily Ruby focused.
Yeah. So we primarily have Ruby. We have a little bit of Elixir. We also on the front end are moving most of our stuff to React, and then on the back end it's Postgres, and then we have a data warehouse and all that kind of stuff for reporting.
Yeah, great. Oh, that's exciting. And then is there? I guess I'm curious because I know you haven't been there a terribly long time. Have you done technical interviews, I guess, on either side of the table or both sides of the table recently?
So not at Yellow, but in my role at Fuda. Right prior to this, we did do quite a bit of technical interviewing, and then I've done it throughout my career. Always been on the front lines of interviewing. So
I love it. Is this something you enjoy doing?
It is something I enjoy. I do find interviewing to be, the maintenance of culture, right? So you're bringing someone new into the team, and by definition, almost the culture will be influenced. And so want to make sure we have the right people on the bus, so to speak, and also just build that rapport with people coming into the company.
Absolutely. I've said this many times, but I always think of it as a culture ad rather than a culture fit, right? It's
Exactly.
like it's going to be impacted in some way, and you're trying to make sure it's a good ad, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. So
I'm curious what you're evaluating for when you're doing technical interviews. I guess it probably changes depending on the role in the team, but maybe specifically what you're interviewing for or what you would be looking for now, and then kind of what you've done in the past as well.
Yeah, so what I'm generally looking for is so the companies that I tend to gravitate toward myself are either B2B or customer facing companies. They're not like the highly academic type of companies where you're asking somebody to write a B tree or like very academic type of questions. And so what I'm looking for is I'm going to be presenting the candidate with a problem that generally hopefully relates directly to the business in some way, or is the same type of problem that we face on a day-to-day basis. And so what I'm looking for is, yes, there's a certain amount of just general competency, But really, it's like, do they value the same engineering principles that we value as a team? So that's generally what I'm looking for.
Yeah. How do you ask questions around that? I'm curious.
So sometimes it's questions, and the questions I would say are more like, how can we make sure that they're forward looking, the right candidate for the team. So
Mhm.
if we're a service oriented architecture, for instance, which by the way Yellow is not, but we do have some services, but I wouldn't say we're completely service oriented. But teams I've worked on in the past have been. And so, do they have experience with like communicating with APIs, or do they know best practices when it comes to uptime and communicating between services, whether that be message based or REST or Graph or
Mhm.
whatever the technology we have. And that's more forward looking, so that we can continue to add to that skill set to the team to bolster while we're upskilling, for lack of a better word, the people internally.
Yeah.
And then the I guess the what I'm really looking for though is how they solve the technical challenge. Like, what do they gravitate toward? How do they like purport themselves during the interview? Right? If they this might be giving away some of the second half of this interview, but or of this conversation, but do they just get the problem, hole up, and then go in a corner and then bang it out and maybe succeed or maybe not? Or is it
Mhm.
very conversational? Are they asking me, are they probing for prop, like I haven't intentionally done this, but sometimes there's a typo that it causes a significant change because I rotate these questions, and so somebody's like, wait, this doesn't quite make sense. Are you sure this is what you meant? And
Yeah.
sometimes the answer is no, like I accidentally put a typo in there.
Interesting. Yeah, that's that's actually funny. Just thinking of how in interviews things can often go wrong, just like in production, right?
Yeah.
Or when you're building for production, you're stuck on something for days, right? And you go, oh, it's this little thing that we assumed was correct, and you sometimes you skip that portion. You're just looking at the part that you thought you changed, right?
Yep.
It happens all the time. And I heard I was working with someone who was recently interviewing with Apple, and they said actually the code sample that they were sent had an issue in it. They didn't realize it till halfway through the interview, right? Which could certainly cause issues.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
That's
Yep.
interesting.
Sure.
Do you have a standardized system that you use when you are doing technicals? And it seems interesting to me that um, you might have to have different kind of stages and different processes depending on the seniority of the role. You might also have to have, you know, especially for your team, like certain types of like take homes almost. I'm just curious what that process looks like.
Yeah. So it's evolved over the years, right? I think at the beginning of my career, everything was like on site, and started it with whiteboards and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, my thinking has definitely changed. I never really liked the whiteboard, problem. But so I guess my general sketch of, I guess, how I interviewed today is starts out with uh, a phone interview, generally with one of my senior engineers or myself, where we are kind of probing for general competency, making sure that when we get bring the person on site, or the full interview, um, it's that they're not just completely over their head,
Mhm.
right? And obviously that bar changes with the role we're hiring for.
Yeah.
There's also a bit of like, is this a person that would add to the team? What are they going to bring from a non-technical standpoint? And so it starts out there. Assuming they get through that portion. We still call it on-site, which is so strange because nothing's on-site these days. But the on-site portion of the interview, which is again all virtual these days, and um, but I do believe in take-home tests. I feel like they accommodate for people's life situations in a much better way, or different, not only life situations, but personality types, and I just think it's a much more real-world example. And I'm not terribly concerned about someone, Googling the exact solution to the problem, because we're going to be probing into it. Like, we're going to be talking through their code with them. So if they can't talk through it, then it's it's going to be very evident, right? So sorry. After they get through that phone interview, we give them the take-home test. We don't have a strict time limit. Generally, we say, I was telling you before the show, I do all of the problems that I give out to candidates myself, and I generally have one of my engineers do it as well. And the purpose of that is just make sure this thing is relevant, make sure I know what we're asking people to do and the time commitment involved there. I target them for 45 to 60 minutes. So if I can't do it in that time frame, how can I expect someone else to do it in that time frame? Not saying I'm the best programmer ever, but like, I should be going through the same process is my opinion. And so we give it to them. We say, here's the problem. Shoot us any questions you have. Give us like when you think you'll get it back. We also don't like require a 24-hour turnaround or anything like that. Again, somebody who is fresh out of college, a 24-hour turnaround might be fine. Somebody that has, a kid at home or other life obligations, or they're currently at a job, like it's just an unreasonable expectation in my opinion.
Yeah.
So we leave the timeline open-ended. We just say, when can you get it back to us? But then we hold them to that. So if you say a week and you get it back in a week, that's just as good as, I'll get it back to you tomorrow. And it's actually worse if you say get it back tomorrow and you give it back to me in 3 days.
Sure.
So that's the take-home portion. Then when we go through the full interview, it's generally we obviously go through that code with the person. So you send it back. One of our senior engineers. I generally have the engineers run this portion of it, but I have I'm always there in case someone's sick or something that day. But we go through the code with them, have them explain it, talk through it, ask questions on our own. We generally have then questions that extend the problem. I don't ask people to generally live code it there, right? It's just like, how would you extend your code to accommodate for this situation? And then if there's significant portions missing that are valuable to us, namely tests, we dive really deep there. So then beyond that interview, there's generally an interview with the manager, so whoever's going to be managing that person. There's an interview with our product, somebody representative from our product team, because to me, the relationship between engineering and product is just so critical that they need to have input into who we're bringing onto the team. And then generally a culture panel, some people that are very passionate about our team and that they want to make sure that this person's going to be bringing something great.
Yeah, that's a pretty detailed process, and it sounds like built in mind for one to be accommodating, but also to have, I don't know if checks and balances is the right term, but really to make sure that everyone fits well with the existing team and has the skill set. So I'm sure there's some training, but at least can hit the ground running to some extent, right? Where it's not a huge ramp up time for individuals.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? Some companies have this philosophy that you should commit and release on day one. I'm not quite that aggressive, but I do want the person when they start to, just sit right down with somebody and just start pairing with them and start getting an idea of what their day-to-day is going to be like. And so we want to bring that as much into the interview process as possible.
Yeah, you mentioned doing the technical yourself, or having one of your senior engineers do the technicals as well. That's really interesting because I don't think I've heard that mentioned from a lot of people, especially at the the director level or above. I know a lot of people get hands off to a certain extent, but I think that's something that just seems so valuable to know. What are you actually sending out, right? Because it's easy to look at a problem and go, that seems good, right? And kind of send it off without really thinking how much time is this going to take, right? So actually doing it with a timer, that's really interesting. How did you start doing that, or when did you come up with that in your career?
So it used to be more of a conversation a couple of years ago where people would be concerned that, oh no, our problem's going to get out there on the web and people are just going to be able to Google it, or they'll know what they're getting into coming into the interview. I've never had really that fear or that, because let's just rotate it frequently, right? If you do dozens of these interviews, you kind of get bored of the problem anyway. So I think it's always good to keep things fresh. And so, but you want some consistency for a role, for instance. Like, you don't want to give different people a different problem within the same role, but switching it out once a year or once every 18 months or something like that, that's no problem, right? And so to me, that was just the best way to gauge the expectations that we're asking our candidates to do, right? I've had, even for some higher level management jobs, you get asked to do a coding challenge, and you may not have to like produce the perfect code, but they want to know that you can relate with engineers and that kind of thing. And some of these problems can take hours and hours, and I just find that that's an unreasonable expectation for candidates. So,
especially for a maybe, right? That's what
exactly.
I used to always advise companies that I was recruiting for that had really long take homes or really long processes. I was like, you're one of many companies this candidate's very likely speaking with, right? And if you have a 8-hour coding challenge or a sometimes 15, 20-hour coding challenge, they might get to it, but if someone else is going to bring them to an onsite, after 2 conversations, well, they're probably going to go to that onsite, right? And they might be gone before they ever think about getting to the coding challenge. So.
Yep, exactly.
That makes sense. It's curious, that idea of a coding question getting out there, like being Googleable, as being a big concern. I've heard that a lot in the past, but it also seems like it's going to come up in the interview process, right? You're going to probe around that, and also a lot of engineers would do that, and if they ran into a problem day to day that they would need to Google for, right? So obviously you don't want it to be a one-liner that they can copy and paste and go, here's the solution, and not have to ever talk about it again. But it does seem like there's checks in place, so if someone was able to find an answer online, you're able to tell, right? It's not like they at least should do more research around that, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, I'm curious. In the past, when you have done technical interviews, when you were more interviewing for maybe more like hands-on technical roles, how did you think you did in those interviews? I'm always curious.
Range the gamut, right? From complete and utter failure to wow, just nailed that one, right? And I definitely think there are some tips and tricks that can help you get closer to that nailed it end and further away from the complete failure. But yeah, I would say it really ranged.
Was there any particular type of question you felt like you didn't do well at, or type of interview you thought you did do well at?
So I used to give talks similar to this to new grads, either at colleges or at like the dev boot camp when that was a thing here in Chicago. And I gave one once with a partner. So Joe Massey, he currently works at Home Chef.
Joe's
he
great.
interviewed me. Yeah, Joe's great. So Joe interviewed me for Innova when I was joining as a hands-on engineer, and it was a whiteboard coding challenge. So everyone loves those, and it was basically the make change problem. If you've as far as I know, they don't give this question anymore, and they definitely don't use whiteboards anymore. But anyway, it was not good. It was pretty much a train wreck, and obviously, I mean, if you look at my resume, obviously I did get hired eventually. But Joe and I joke about that because, like, he was just like, I can't even with this guy, right? And eventually got hired anyway. But it's just a funny story that something can go really poorly, and you can then end up not only getting hired but doing really well at the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a hard thing to, and part of the whole goal of this show is just giving insight into what that process is like, and trying to de-stress technicals, right? Because I think that's such an easy thing to fall into, is you're in that situation where you go, oh no, I don't know how to solve this, right? And it's been 15 minutes of a 30-minute interview or 45-minute interview. I'm no closer to solving it. And, I was really invested in this company, either mentally or even emotionally sometimes. And then it just feels like the world's going to explode, right? And sometimes you just have to turn it into a learning experience, and
totally agree.
You can laugh about it later, right?
Yeah, exactly. And try to get some learning. I mean, you have access to probably a senior engineer for an hour, and so see what you can get out of it, see what you can learn, see what I hope the industry is evolving in terms of like not sitting there and pointing and making fun at people for not solving the problem. I hope that it's becoming more collaborative and more more of a learning experience. And so that's what I've seen, or that at least that's what I coach my interviewers on. Is like, if this person is just deer in the headlights, not going to make it, just bring them along, right?
Yeah.
And you can just code it all out there with them, and we may not move forward with that candidate, but at least we've given them a good experience, and they're going to walk away with some better knowledge.
Totally. Turning it into a candidate experience thought process instead of I'm interviewing this person thought process, right? Is something that I think maybe it's a difficult transition for some people to make while interviewing, but I feel like so important if you actually want that person maybe to come back in the future, or at least not say bad things about your your company,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Later.
Whether you could hire them in a couple of years, or the dreaded bad Glassdoor review.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have a system that you used to break down technical questions if you ran into something where you went, oh, I don't know how to solve this?
Yeah. So I think one of the tips that I was mentioning earlier to reduce the complete train wreck of a performance is thinking about it from a testing standpoint first. So you know, almost by default, the candidates that are going to start out not at, if it's a 1 to 10 scale, they're going to start out at 2 or 3 just as a baseline. If they just start talking about tests, write some tests, um, figuring out what is the desired end result, and how can I just test to see that like a 0 line code like works, or like the tests run, right? Like run red. So I'd say that's a starting point. I would say kind of what I hinted at earlier, which is just talking it through with the interviewer. Um, and they might sound like obvious questions, but like, you ask obvious questions every day to make sure you have a full understanding of what's being asked of you. So just saying like, okay, just confirming what the inputs are, confirming what the desired outcome is, asking if there's certain like, are you looking for a recursive algorithm, or just like kind of not buying time necessarily, but just like making sure you really understand what's being asked of you, and sometimes those answers will guide you in the right direction. Because again, I don't think that interviewers are sitting there trying to punish you, right? They're not trying to give you the answer, but they also don't want to have an hour-long awkward session sitting there staring at someone, right? And so
Yeah.
it's a little different when it's a take-home, right? If it's a take-home, I would still fire back some questions to the person, especially if they've offered it. But anyway, it's a similar process. It's just async versus synchronous, right?
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that talking through it is very common advice that can easily get lost when you have the fear of now I'm interviewing. And it's interesting. Testing is something that I feel like every company wants to do tests. I think many get some part of the way there. What would you say for people who aren't testing day to day, maybe myself included, who are going into interviews and they're thinking, okay, well, how do I don't know, at least address that in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I'm a very experiential learner. I do not learn. I mean, I learn a little bit academically, but I really start to understand something by doing it. And so I would just say, dive in, right? When you're One of the things that you can do to prepare for these interviews is signing up for one of these services like Code Wars, or there's other ones out there where you can just do a kata a day, and start there. Start writing tests right there. Again, getting back to the experiential portion, when React kind of really started dominating some of the front end development work, it's not something I was using on a day-to-day basis when I was coding. So I built a little static site using Gatsby, just to get the syntax, get the idea of how this language works. And I would say the same thing with testing, right? If you're not doing it on a day-to-day basis, choose the dominant framework of your language, RSpec or Minitest if you're in Ruby, and just dive in, write a simple test, and just build on those skills from there.
Totally. It makes a lot of sense. And I think we haven't mentioned it specifically, but something that's important to keep in mind is like having some type of side project or something that you could build on top of, right? So I have a project right now I know I could implement tests into, right? And that would be a great way for me to learn. It's just, you got to do
Yeah,
it.
yeah, for sure.
Any other advice or tips for people going into technical interviews? Obviously, like you just mentioned, doing code wars or like interview cake or one of those leak code, I think is a popular one. That's obviously helpful, right? Just for seeing the types of questions that are out there, and some of the things you mentioned earlier. But any other advice or tips for folks?
So I don't know that this is a dominant philosophy like with other companies, but at least from my perspective, I would say get really good at one language, and don't try to tailor your interview to the language of the company. So if you
Mm-hmm.
know the company is a Java shop or a Python shop or a Ruby shop, and you don't have that skill set,
Mm-hmm.
I would first ask, like, do you expect me to write it in whatever your language is? Because I think I don't know this for sure, but I think oftentimes the answer is going to be no. At least
Mm-hmm.
it would be for interviews I'm doing. I tend to give people a stable of languages they could use. I try not to leave it completely open ended, because if nobody on our team is familiar with some like Rust, for instance, then if you write your whole thing in Rust, we're not going to be able to give you good feedback, and we're not going to be able to understand um, understand the level that you're delivering in. And so we generally would give people like a wide range of languages. We're talking like 7 or 8 choices. So hopefully you fall into one of those 7 or 8. But I would just say get really good at one, so
Mm-hmm.
you're not trying to figure out the language while you're trying to figure out the problem. So get
Yeah.
get that part off the table, and then you can just work on solving the problem. I think that's one big one that I would say. Starting with tests to me is always a great way to build rapport with the interviewer, build
Mm-hmm.
confidence that you've done this before, and that you kind of know how it works in a production environment. Um, like I said, diversity of problems. Just try different stuff from like the hyper academic side to the very pragmatic side. Um, those are just some tips, quick.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. That third piece there, I think it is. A lot of people think of it interviewing as like they're all going to be these crazy difficult whiteboarding problems, but like what I see more frequently than like than even something like bubble sort or some type of sorting algorithm, which not the craziest thing in the world. Like it's not like reversing a linked list, right? But it's still a little bit more academic. But I see much more common like something straightforward, like reverse a string or like pulled something out of an array, right? Calculate something out of an array, and that's the type of stuff where I think if you're trying different problems, you'll realize that might be a little bit more straightforward. I think it's sometimes harder to find those problems online because if you looking for interview prep, often it's geared towards what's the most wide reaching, and that's sometimes are those more academic problems.
Yeah, and I would say like when you're diving into to solve the problem, if it's reverse a string, for instance, and you're using like Ruby, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
I would start with the most straightforward solution. So dot reverse on a string will reverse the string, and of course it can be a little joke between you and the interviewer that's not what they're looking for, but
Yeah.
it gives them an idea of like, oh, this person is familiar with the language, and they can do it in the most straightforward way. And then now we can dive into the what you're actually looking for.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that can, like you said, it's almost a joke, or you can like talk through. Like, I always say, what is the brute force solution? Can you at least mention that, right? Like, oh,
Yeah,
we could use nested loops to do this,
yeah,
but we can probably find a faster way to do it, right?
yeah.
Uh, and literally, that someone can go, okay, well, at least they've checked that box, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if it's like a sorting algorithm, my first response might be like again, while I'm trying to mentally figure out how I'm going to actually execute this problem, just talk through how you would solve it in the real world. I'd probably go out to GitHub and look for a gem that would help me with this, right?
Mhm.
Like if I'm doing this, in a production app, and again, it it gives them an idea of how you would solve the problem if it did come up. Like you're generally not gonna write your own sorting algorithm if you have to sort something, right?
Yeah. Right. Do you have different advice for early career engineers, maybe in the first few interviews, maybe the first technical interview?
Yeah, it's so easy for me to say, but just use it as a learning experience. Don't be like your nervousness, your fright, if you're scared, it's going to come through. And and you know, again, it's easy for me as a white male, been in this industry for a long time, to say go in with confidence. And I know that's much easier said than done, but I would say that's true. Like, go in that you are confident in your skill set. You're not trying to go in to be their, staff engineer. You're taking an entry level role, and you have confidence in your skill set to do it. Give credit to all those hours you've put into training, into learning, and whatever schooling or training you went through. Give credit to that, right? You've done a lot of stuff. And so, like I said, easier said than done, but confidence is a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people, if you're looking at it as a learning experience, like, it may go terribly wrong, but at least you can take something out of it, right? And
Exactly.
hopefully the next one gets a little better, so it only goes really poorly, and then poorly, you work your way up, right? And all it takes is the one to go well.
It's the whole sales technique, right? You're going to get way more no's than you're going to get yeses, and that doesn't make the no's sting any less. But but you can take those learnings into the next experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know you mentioned the story with Joe. Do you have any other personal interviewing horror stories to share before we move on to the technical portion?
Man, I mean, that one was so brutal that it's hard to beat that one. I don't know that I have too many other. I think the other one, the worst ones beyond that are when you do believe you did a great job, and you just don't see what they did, or you don't understand what they didn't see. And again, maybe it's an overconfidence thing. Maybe I didn't do a great job, but I at least felt like I did a great job, and didn't get negative feedback during the interview, or didn't get specifics, and it's just like, dang, what did I miss?
Yeah. You know what? My time in recruiting taught me, like, there's so many people often that are in an interview process. Sometimes someone can be great, but if you're in the beginning of an interview process while someone else, who's maybe not even better, just good enough, is at the tail end of the interview process, and they need someone to start quickly, well, that person's going to get an offer. Well, and you're not going to get poor feedback, right? But it's basically, we ran out of time, and that's sometimes difficult to portray, right, to people. So
either that or just splitting hairs, right? There's a lot of good candidates out there. So
totally.
So if you have one role and you got 2 or 3 great people, unfortunately, you're going to be telling 2 of those people, the great people, no.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll move into the technical portion.
Sounds good.
Thank you for watching the first half of the Professional Technical Interviewee. The technical interview will be released 1 week from this episode, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Dorsett, or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.